Commander Rex Tank Morrison stood at the viewport of the shuttle, watching the ominous green and purple swirls of Grimtooth 7's atmosphere with all the enthusiasm of someone about to walk into a wood chipper, which, considering the planet's reputation, wasn't far from accurate. "Remind me again why we couldn't just send a probe," Tank muttered, adjusting his tactical vest with practiced indifference. Lieutenant Claxon, whose species looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with an anxiety disorder, clicked his mandibles nervously. "Because, Commander, the electromagnetic interference makes remote operations impossible. Also, the last 3 probes we sent were apparently eaten by something called a skull crusher worm, which I feel doesn't bode well for our mission." Tank turned to face his motley crew, suppressing a grin. The Galactic Council really had outdone themselves this time. Take one human commander known for his unconventional methods, throw in the most paranoid insectoid in the fleet, add one brilliant human scientist, and top it off with an arrogant reptilian captain who thought humans were basically hairless space hamsters. What could possibly go wrong? "Dr. Nightshade," Tank addressed the woman hunched over her tablet. "What's your professional opinion on our survival chances?" Dr. Vera Nightshade looked up from her research with the kind of expression usually reserved for tax audits and root canals. "Well, Tank, considering this planet has a documented mortality rate of 98% for off-world visitors, I'd say we're either very brave or very stupid, possibly both." Captain Zephos, whose scales gleamed with that particular shade of green that screamed, "Apex predator with an ego problem," snorted dismissively. "Humans and their pessimism. My species conquered 12 star systems before yours even discovered fire. A few oversized animals won't present any real challenge." Tank raised an eyebrow. "Says the guy whose battle plan for everything involves superior firepower and tactical superiority." "Because it works," Zephos replied, with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't shoot at. The shuttle shuddered as they entered the atmosphere, and Klaxon immediately began reciting what sounded like a prayer in his native language, or possibly a grocery list. With insectoids, it was hard to tell. "For the record," Dr. Nightshade announced, still scrolling through her data, "Grimtooth 7 is home to approximately 437 documented species of predatory fauna, each one capable of killing a grown Alterian battle rhino. The survival guide literally just says, don't." "Don't what?" Tank asked. "Just don't. That's the entire entry. Don't." Zephos waved a dismissive claw. "Typical human overcaution. These so-called death beasts are probably just large herbivores with aggressive marketing." Tank looked out at the twisted, thorn-covered landscape rushing up to meet them and couldn't help but smile. In his experience, the universe had a twisted sense of humor, and right about now, it was probably laughing its cosmic ass off. "All right, team," he said as the shuttle touched down with a thud that suggested their pilot had been aiming for controlled crash rather than landing. "Mission is simple. Get to the crashed ship, retrieve the intel, try not to become something's lunch. Questions?" Klaxon's compound eyes somehow managed to look even more terrified. "What if we encounter hostile fauna?" "We follow standard protocol," Tank replied, shouldering his pack. "Which is?" Tank grinned as the shuttle doors hissed open, revealing a world that looked like it had been designed by someone with serious anger management issues. "Where it?" They'd been hiking through the nightmare landscape for exactly 17 minutes when Klaxon's antennae started twitching like live wires. "Contact, contact," he whispered, which for an insectoid meant it came out as a series of clicks that sounded like an angry typewriter. "Massive heat signature. 200 meters northwest, moving fast." Dr. Nightshade immediately pulled up her scanner, frowning at the readings. That's impossible. According to this, whatever's coming our way is roughly the size of a small shuttle and apparently has claws that register as weapons grade." Zephos drew his plasma rifle with theatrical flair. "Finally, some action. Stand back, mammals, and observe how a true predator handles." His boasting was cut short by a sound that could best be described as a freight train having an argument with a chainsaw. The underbrush exploded as something emerged that made Tank's day considerably more interesting. The razor-claw stalker stood 12 feet tall, with midnight black chitin that gleamed like polished metal, 6 eyes that glowed like angry coals, and claws that could probably cut through hull plating. Its mouth opened to reveal 3 rows of teeth that belonged in a horror movie, and it let out a roar that made Klaxon's knees buckle. "Tactical retreat!" Zephos shouted, his earlier bravado evaporating faster than water on Mercury. "Run for your lives," Klaxon added, which was entirely unhelpful but probably accurate. Dr. Nightshade was backing away slowly, muttering, "This is why I should have gone into theoretical xenobiology. Theoretical creatures never try to eat you." Tank, meanwhile, did something that caused all three of his companions to question his sanity. He reached into his pack, pulled out a sandwich, and started walking toward the death machine. "Tank, what are you doing?" Dr. Nightshade hissed. "Making friends," Tank replied conversationally, as if approaching a 12-foot murder beast was just another Tuesday activity. The stalker's 6 eyes focused on Tank with the kind of attention usually reserved for a particularly interesting prey. It crouched low, muscles coiling like springs, ready to pounce. Tank stopped about 10 feet away and held up the sandwich. "Hey there, big guy. You look hungry. Want some peanut butter and jelly?" The creature tilted its massive head, clearly processing this unexpected development. After a moment that felt like several eternities, it approached cautiously, sniffed the sandwich with nostrils that could have doubled as exhaust ports, and then gently took it from Tank's hand. "This is not happening," Klaxon whispered. "This is not actually happening." The stalker examined the sandwich with the careful attention of a food critic, took a tentative bite, and then proceeded to devour the entire thing in 3 massive gulps. When it finished, it looked at Tank expectantly, like a dog waiting for another treat. Tank scratched behind one of its ear holes, which caused the creature to make a sound disturbingly similar to purring, if purring could rattle windows. "Good boy," Tank said, as if he hadn't just befriended something that belonged in a horror movie. "Want to come with us? We're going on an adventure." Dr. Nightshade stared at him. "Tank, that thing could rip your head off." "So could Xephos on a bad day, and we brought him along," Tank replied reasonably. The stalker, apparently having made its decision, positioned itself next to Tank and fixed the other 3 team members with a look that clearly said, "These are my humans now. Touch them and become lunch." Xephos slowly holstered his weapon, his scales having shifted to a pale green that Tank was pretty sure meant existential crisis in progress. "This is unprecedented," the reptilian muttered. "Razorclaw stalkers are apex predators. They don't make friends." Tank shrugged. "Maybe. You just weren't asking nicely." As they resumed their trek toward the crashed ship, now accompanied by their new 12-foot escort, Dr. Nightshade fell into step beside Tank. "Okay, I have to ask," she said quietly. "How did you know that would work?" Tank glanced at their new companion, who was currently scanning the horizon for threats with the dedication of a professional bodyguard. "Lucky guess," he said. But Dr. Nightshade noticed he was smiling. By the time they'd covered another kilometer, Tank had somehow managed to collect 2 more additions to their increasingly ridiculous parade. The first was Spike, an armored tunneler that looked like someone had crossed a pangolin with a bulldozer and given it anger management issues. It had emerged from underground just as Xephos was in the middle of explaining why Razorclaw's stalkers were definitely going to turn on them the moment they showed weakness. "They're not domesticated animals," Xephos was saying, his scales still that pale green color of barely controlled panic. "They're killing machines with millions of years of evolutionary programming to—" The ground erupted next to him, and Spike burst forth in a shower of dirt and rocks, all 6 tons of armored fury and spinning drill bits. Xephos let out a sound that his species would probably deny was technically a shriek. Tank, meanwhile, walked over and started scratching the creature's belly plates. "Who's a good digger? You are. Yes, you are," Tank cooed in baby talk that would have been embarrassing coming from anyone else, but somehow worked perfectly when addressed to a living siege engine. Spike immediately flopped over like an enormous deadly puppy, making happy rumbling sounds that shook the ground. "This is impossible," Dr. Nightshade muttered, taking notes furiously. "Tunnelers are territorial, solitary predators. They don't form social bonds. They certainly don't respond to baby talk." "Maybe no one ever tried baby talk before," Tank suggested, still giving Spike belly rubs that the creature was clearly enjoying immensely. The second addition came from above. Klaxon spotted it first, his compound eyes tracking something in the sky. "Airborne contact. Acid-spitting flyer incoming fast." What descended from the purple-tinged clouds looked like someone had given a pterodactyl a chemistry set and a serious attitude problem. Fluffy, as Tank immediately dubbed her, had a wingspan that could shade a small building and acid sacs that were already glowing ominously. She landed with a thud that cracked the rocky ground, opened her beak to reveal rows of dissolving agent dispensers, and prepared to turn the team into a very unpleasant puddle. "Nice birdie," Tank said, reaching into his pack again. "Want a cracker?" "Tank, that's not going to work twice," Dr. Nightshade warned. "Acid spinners are completely different from—" She stopped talking because Fluffy had delicately taken the cracker from Tank's fingers and was now nuzzling his shoulder with a beak that could melt through starship hull. "You have got to be kidding me," Zephos whispered. But it was the third edition that really broke everyone's brains. Big Mama appeared, without warning, which was impressive considering she was roughly the size of a city bus and had the stealth capabilities of a freight train in a library. The territorial pack leader materialized from behind a rock formation that definitely hadn't been large enough to hide her, carrying something in her massive jaws. She padded over to Tank with the careful dignity of something that had never met anything capable of challenging her, dropped her offering at his feet, and sat back on her haunches expectantly. Tank looked down at the gift. It was the remains of something that had probably been terrifying when it was alive. "Ah, you brought me a present," Tank said, patting Big Mama's house-sized head. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Big Mama made a sound that was probably purring, if purring could be heard from orbit. Dr. Nightshade stared at the growing menagerie surrounding Tank. The Razorclaw stalker was positioned like a bodyguard. Spike was rolling around happily in the dirt. Fluffy was preening her feathers while perched on a convenient boulder, and Big Mama was clearly the matriarch keeping watch over the whole bizarre family unit. "This doesn't make sense," she said finally. "These are apex predators from different ecological niches. They should be fighting each other, not whatever this is." "Maybe they recognize a fellow alpha when they see one," Tank suggested, scratching Big Mama behind what might have been an ear. Klaxon, who had been unusually quiet during the recent recruitments, finally spoke up. "Commander, I've been running calculations, and statistically speaking, what you're doing should result in immediate death approximately 97% of the time." "What about the other 3%? Tank asked. "That's for cases where the data is insufficient," Klaxon admitted. "Like this one." Zephos looked around at their escort of Deathworld predators, all of whom seemed perfectly content to follow Tank's lead, and shook his reptilian head slowly. "In 12 campaigns across 8 star systems, I have never seen anything like this," he muttered. "These creatures should be trying to eat us, not acting like domesticated pets." Tank looked at his growing pack, all of them alert and ready to defend their little group, and smiled that same knowing smile Dr. Nightshade had noticed before. "Who says anything about domesticated?" he said. "We're all just heading in the same direction." As they continued toward their destination, now accompanied by enough firepower to level a small city, Dr. Nightshade found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was something about humans that the rest of the galaxy hadn't quite figured out yet. The crashed ship appeared through the twisted forest like a metallic gravestone, its hull split open and blackened from weapon impacts that definitely hadn't come from local wildlife. Tank's newly formed pack immediately went on high alert, with Big Mama positioning herself at the front, Spike beginning to burrow defensive positions, and Fluffy taking to the air for reconnaissance. "Well, that's not good," Dr. Nightshade muttered, scanning the wreckage with her instruments. "These blast patterns are consistent with hegemony plasma cannons, military grade." Zephos's scales darkened to a deep emerald, which Tank had learned meant "oh crap" in reptilian body language. "The hegemony? Here? But this sector is supposed to be neutral space." "Tell that to them," Tank replied, studying the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too many battlefields. The scorch marks on the surrounding trees, the precise blast patterns, the way the ship had been systematically dismantled rather than simply destroyed, it all painted a very clear picture. This wasn't a crash. This was an execution. Klaxon's antennae were practically vibrating with anxiety. "Commander, my sensors are detecting multiple heat signatures moving through the forest, large ones, coordinated movement patterns." Tank's pack sensed the change in atmosphere immediately. The Razorclaw stalker's eyes began glowing brighter. Spike emerged from his impromptu bunker with dirt cascading off his armored hide, and Big Mama let out a low growl that made the air itself seem to tremble. "How many?" Tank asked quietly. 50, maybe 60, Klaxon whispered. "All armed. All moving in formation." Dr. Nightshade looked up from her scanner, her face pale. "Tank, these readings, they're not just hegemony infantry. They've got heavy weapons platforms, aerial support, and what looks like at least 3 siege mechs." "Siege mechs?" Zephos' voice cracked slightly. "But those are designed for planetary invasions, not recovery operations." Tank knelt down and placed a hand on Big Mama's massive flank, feeling the tension coiled in her muscles. Around him, his pack was arranging themselves in what any military strategist would recognize as a defensive formation, but they weren't looking to Tank for orders. They were waiting for his decision. "They're not here for recovery," Tank said, his voice taking on an edge his companions had never heard before. They're here to make sure nobody else recovers anything, which means they knew we were coming. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Somewhere in the Galactic Council there was a leak. Someone had sold them out. Fluffy returned from her aerial reconnaissance with a series of clicks and screeches that Tank somehow understood. The others watched in amazement as he nodded thoughtfully at her report. Fluffy says they've got us surrounded. 3 attack groups closing from different directions, with heavy weapons positioned to cut off any retreat routes, Tank translated, ignoring the looks of disbelief from his companions. You can understand her? Dr. Nightshade asked incredulously. Body language, Tank replied dismissively, though his pack clearly disagreed with that assessment. The question is, what do we do about it? Zephos drew his weapon with shaking hands. We fight, of course, though against those odds. We'll be slaughtered, Klaxon finished miserably. Statistically, our survival chances have just dropped to approximately 0.03%. I like those odds, Tank said, which caused everyone to stare at him. Tank, there are 60 of them, Dr. Nightshade pointed out reasonably. 4 of us. That's not exactly a fair fight. Tank looked around at his pack, all of them watching him with the kind of attention that suggested they were waiting for something. Big Mama's tail was switching back and forth, not with anxiety but with anticipation. Spike was testing his drill claws against the rocky ground, carving furrows with casual ease. The Razorclaw Stalker was studying the forest with tactical precision, already identifying optimal attack routes. And Fluffy? Fluffy was making a sound that Tank had learned meant she was looking forward to showing someone why her species was called acid-spitting flyers, instead of something more pleasant, like pretty rainbow birds. You're right, Tank said finally, standing up and checking his weapon. It's not fair. Exactly, Zephos said with relief. So we should... For them, Tank finished. The first hegemony soldiers appeared at the tree line like shadows given form, their black armor gleaming with the kind of technological superiority that had conquered 17 star systems. They moved with military precision, weapons trained, communications coordinated, every detail planned and executed flawlessly. What they hadn't planned for was Big Mama's roar. The sound that erupted from the territorial pack leader's throat wasn't just noise, it was a declaration of war that every predator within 50 kilometers would understand. It said, simply and clearly, these are mine. Touch them, and die. The hegemony soldiers hesitated for exactly 1 second, which in military terms might as well have been an eternity. Tank's pack didn't hesitate at all. The battle was about to begin, and for the first time since setting foot on Grimtooth 7, Tank's alien companions began to understand that maybe, just maybe, they weren't the ones who needed protecting. As Spike began tunneling toward the enemy positions with the subtle grace of a living earthquake, and Fluffy took to the air with acid sacs glowing like miniature suns, Tank turned to his bewildered team. Stay close, he said calmly, as if he hadn't just turned a hopeless situation into something that looked suspiciously like an ambush. And try to keep up. Dr. Nightshade stared at him, then at the chaos beginning to unfold around them, and suddenly understood that she'd been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't how Tank had tamed these creatures. The question was, what kind of species produces individuals that apex predators instinctively recognize as pack leaders? What happened next would later be studied in military academies across 12 star systems, though the official reports would carefully omit certain details that administrators felt were too ridiculous to be believed. The first hegemony assault squad never knew what hit them. Spike erupted from beneath their formation like a living missile, his drill claws spinning with enough force to shred their heavy armor like paper. But it wasn't random destruction. He was following Tank's hand signals, creating specific breach points in their defensive line with the precision of a surgeon using a chainsaw. Left flank, Spike, Tank called out, pointing toward a cluster of heavy weapons emplacements. Create some breathing room. The armored tunneler immediately shifted direction, disappearing underground only to surface directly beneath a hegemony plasma cannon. The resulting explosion sent enemy soldiers diving for cover, while their equipment became very expensive scrap metal. Fluffy, meanwhile, had turned the sky into her personal hunting ground. She dove and weaved between enemy aircraft with the aerial superiority of something that had been born to rule the skies, her acid dispensers turning hegemony fighters into falling rain. But she wasn't just attacking randomly. She was systematically eliminating their air support in a pattern that left their ground forces exposed to attack from above. Beautiful work, girl, Tank shouted as Fluffy executed a barrel roll that would have made ace pilots weep with envy, simultaneously dodging 3 missile locks and dissolving an enemy gunship's wing assembly. Now hit their command center! The Razor Claw stalker had become a living shadow, moving through the enemy ranks with the kind of lethal grace that nightmares were made of. His 6 eyes tracked multiple targets simultaneously while his claws carved through hegemony battle armor like it was decorative foil. But what made Dr. Nightshade's jaw drop wasn't his speed or his lethality, it was his tactical awareness. He wasn't just killing enemies, he was protecting Tank's flanks, creating escape routes, and coordinating with the other pack members in ways that suggested a level of battlefield intelligence that shouldn't have been possible. "This is impossible," Klaxon whispered, watching the stalker execute a maneuver that would have impressed Special Forces commandos. "Predators don't coordinate like this. They don't understand military tactics." "No," Dr. Nightshade breathed, her scientific mind finally putting the pieces together. "They do understand. They've always understood. We just never realized what we were looking at." And then there was Big Mama. The territorial pack leader moved through the battlefield like a force of nature given form and purpose. Enemy fire bounced off her armored hide without leaving a mark, while her massive claws turned hegemony siege mechs into very expensive modern art. But she wasn't just destroying everything in her path. She was anchoring their defensive line, creating a mobile fortress that the entire pack could rally around. When a hegemony missile barrage targeted their position, Big Mama simply positioned herself as a shield, tanking impacts that should have leveled a building while Spike tunneled their attackers from behind and Fluffy strafed them from above. Tank moved through the chaos like he was conducting a symphony, his hand signals and tactical calls coordinating 4 apex predators in a display of battlefield coordination that defied every known law of xenobiology. "Spike, tunnel left and come up behind that command post. Fluffy, I need suppressing fire on that ridge. Big Mama, can you handle that siege mech? Stalker, watch our 6. Each creature responded instantly, not like trained animals following commands, but like experienced soldiers who trusted their commanding officer implicitly. Zephos, who had spent the first few minutes of the battle hiding behind a conveniently placed boulder, finally emerged to witness something that shattered his understanding of the universe. He watched Tank coordinate a tactical assault that was systematically dismantling a superior enemy force using nothing but hand signals and what appeared to be casual conversation with creatures that shouldn't have been able to understand military strategy. "How?" Zephos whispered. "How is he doing this?" Dr. Nightshade, who was simultaneously taking notes and providing covering fire, looked up from her scanner readings with an expression of scientific revelation mixed with dawning terror. "Because they're not pets," she said, her voice filled with awe and understanding. "They're not tamed animals or domesticated creatures. They're pack hunters, just like us." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Humans hadn't conquered these creatures through some mystical power or advanced technology. They hadn't tamed them or broken their spirits or forced them into submission. They had been recognized. "We're the same," she continued, her voice growing stronger as the pieces fell into place. "Humans and these Deathworld predators. We evolved the same survival strategy. We hunt in coordinated groups. We protect our pack members. We follow strong leaders who prove themselves worthy of loyalty. We fight to the death for our chosen family." Klaxon's compound eyes widened as he processed the implications. "You mean humans are apex predators?" Dr. Nightshade finished. "We're not the harmless, peace-loving species the galaxy thinks we are. We are pack hunters from a death world, just like this one. These creatures don't see Tank as their master, they see him as their alpha." As if to prove her point, Tank executed a tactical movement that drew enemy fire away from a wounded Spike, putting himself directly in harm's way to protect his packmate. The response was immediate. Big Mama roared with protective fury and charged the enemy position, while the Stalker and Fluffy moved to shield Tank from counterattack. They weren't following orders, they were protecting family. The battle reached its crescendo when the remaining hegemony forces, realizing they were being systematically destroyed by what their sensors kept insisting were local wildlife, called in orbital bombardment. Tank looked up at the sky where targeting lasers were beginning to paint their position, smiled that knowing smile that Dr. Nightshade was finally beginning to understand, and made a sound that wasn't quite human. It was a howl, a pack call, a rallying cry that spoke to something primal and ancient and utterly terrifying. And across Grimtooth 7, every apex predator within 100 kilometers heard it and understood. The cavalry was coming. What arrived in response to Tank's call would later be classified by Galactic Command as An inexplicable convergence of hostile fauna that defies all known behavioral patterns and definitely doesn't suggest anything concerning about human evolutionary psychology. The official report would not mention the shadow maw pride that emerged from the northern forests moving in perfect formation. It would certainly not discuss the thunder worms that erupted from underground in coordinated strikes against hegemony positions. And it would absolutely not reference the aerial squadron of void raptors that descended from the upper atmosphere like angels of death with really bad attitudes. But Dr. Nightshade saw it all, and her scientific mind catalogued every impossible detail as dozens of apex predators answered their pack leader's call. "This isn't happening," Klaxon whispered, watching a crystalback behemoth casually step on a hegemony siege mech like it was stepping on a particularly annoying insect. "Territorial species don't cooperate. They don't form alliances. They definitely don't coordinate military operations. Unless," Dr. Nightshade said, her voice filled with scientific wonder and existential dread, "they recognize something that supersedes territory, something more important than individual hunting grounds." The hegemony orbital bombardment never came. It was hard to target ground positions when void raptors were systematically dismantling your orbital platforms with the casual efficiency of exterminators dealing with particularly troublesome pests. The ground battle, meanwhile, had transformed from a desperate last stand into something that resembled a very one-sided nature documentary. Hegemony soldiers found themselves facing not just Tank's original pack, but an entire ecosystem of Deathworld predators operating under unified command. Tank moved through the chaos like he was born to it, his tactical calls now reaching creatures he'd never met but who responded to his leadership as if they'd served under him for years. A gesture here directed a pack of bone crusher stalkers to flank an enemy position. A whistle there coordinated 3 different species in a pincer movement that would have impressed military strategists across the galaxy. "Sir," one of the few surviving hegemony commanders called over his communicator, his voice cracking with panic. "We need immediate evacuation. The local wildlife has gone completely insane. They're working together. They're using tactics. One of them just set up what I can only describe as a suppressing fire position." The response from Hegemony Command was exactly what Tank expected. "Wildlife doesn't use tactics, Commander. Reassess and continue mission." Tank caught Dr. Nightshade's eye and shrugged. "They never learn." What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of why certain planets earned the classification Deathworld, and why certain species earned the classification Apex Predator. The hegemony forces, despite their advanced technology and superior numbers, found themselves systematically outmaneuvered, outflanked, and generally out-hunted by creatures that supposedly operated on instinct alone. When the last enemy transport lifted off in full retreat, leaving behind enough abandoned equipment to outfit a small army, Tank's expanded pack gathered around him in a loose circle. Dozens of creatures that should have been trying to eat each other instead formed a protective perimeter around their chosen alpha. "Mission accomplished," Tank announced, pulling the recovered intel from the crashed ship's data core. "All objectives secured, enemy forces neutralized, and—" He looked around at his new extended family, "and I seem to have picked up a few hitchhikers." Zephos, whose scales had shifted through so many different colors during the battle that he looked like a walking mood ring, finally spoke up. "Commander, with all due respect, what exactly are you—" Tank considered the question while scratching Big Mama behind what might have been an ear. Around him, creatures that had struck fear into the hearts of soldiers across the galaxy waited patiently for his answer, like loyal dogs waiting for their master to finish a conversation. "I'm human," Tank said simply. "We're pack hunters from a death world called Earth. We evolved to work together, to protect our own, and to never ever give up on family. The only difference between us and these guys," he gestured to his assembled pack, "is that we learned to use tools." Dr. Nightshade looked around at the assembled predators, then back at Tank, and felt something click into place in her scientific understanding of the universe. "That's why the Galactic Council was so eager to include humans in their military operations," she said slowly. "They didn't want us for our technology or our numbers. They wanted us because we're the only species that Deathworld predators recognize as legitimate pack leaders." Tank nodded. "Humans make excellent officers for a very simple reason. We understand loyalty, hierarchy, and the concept of fighting as a unit. Most galactic species evolved from prey animals or solitary hunters. They understand individual survival, but not pack dynamics." "But we do," Dr. Nightshade continued, the implications becoming clearer, "because we're predators too. We're just predators that learned to build starships." Flaxen, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. Commander, when you say hitchhikers, you do realize that several of these creatures are classified as extinction-level threats to most galactic civilization. Tank looked around at his pack, all of whom were looking back at him with expressions that somehow managed to be both terrifying and affectionate. Yeah, but there are extinction-level threats now, he said reasonably. Besides, they'll behave themselves as long as nobody threatens the pack. As they prepared to return to their shuttle, Tank activated his communicator to file his mission report. Command, this is Morrison. Mission accomplished, intel recovered, hostile forces neutralized, and requesting permission to bring aboard approximately 37 local fauna specimens for extended diplomatic relations. The response was immediate. Negative, Morrison. Standard protocol prohibits bringing Deathworld predators aboard Galactic Council vessels. Tank looked around at his new family, all of whom were looking at him with expressions that clearly said they had no intention of being left behind. Command, be advised that the local fauna specimens have expressed a strong desire to continue serving in a military capacity. They appear to have formed emotional attachments to human personnel and are exhibiting signs of separation anxiety. There was a long pause from Command, followed by, Morrison, are you telling us that Deathworld predators want to join the military? Tank watched as Big Mama gently nudged Spike away from a particularly interesting piece of hegemony technology that he was about to accidentally destroy, while Fluffy preened her feathers and kept one eye on the surrounding perimeter. Sir, I'm telling you that they already have. And as the shuttle lifted off from Grimtooth 7, carrying its unusual cargo of humans, aliens, and assorted Deathworld predators who had collectively decided that this particular pack was worth following to the stars, Dr. Nightshade made a note in her research log that would later change the galaxy's understanding of human psychology forever. Humans do not tame Deathworld predators. Deathworld predators recognize humans as fellow apex predators and choose to follow them. The implications for galactic military doctrine are significant. Tank, meanwhile, was busy explaining to Command why their new recruits would need specialized dietary requirements, custom sleeping quarters, and possibly their own deck on any future assignments. Think of it as expanding our operational capabilities, he said reasonably, while Big Mama rumbled contentedly in the background, and Spike practiced his drilling techniques on some spare bulkhead plating. Besides, Tank added, watching his pack settle in for the journey home, when you're exploring a galaxy full of hostile aliens and unknown dangers, it's good to have family watching your back. And somewhere in the depths of space, word began to spread through back channels and black market information networks that humans weren't quite what they seemed. They weren't the harmless, diplomatic species that the galaxy had assumed. They were something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. They were pack leaders who could unite Deathworld predators under a single banner and make them fight like soldiers instead of animals. The galaxy was about to discover what that meant.